part 2 of decoy spreads. Part 1, Cal talked about water spreads, goose spreads, full bodies, silhouettes, all that jazz. I'm going to go a little bit more into detail in advance because we get a lot of questions about how to set your decoys, and there's 2 ways of explaining it. No way of explaining it, hey, how do I set my decoys? Don't really want to respond to that. The second one is so much detail, it's 10 paragraphs, and it's so much to unpack. So I figured we'd just make a video about it, and let's start with duck hunting on water. So in the Midwest, in Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, Wisconsin, it's all about the same. And generally what we're doing for decoy spreads is anywhere from 2 to 6 dozen. And 6 dozen obviously being later in the year. But a general decoy spread is about 3 dozen mallard floaters with some widgeon, pintail, and the Lucky Spoonie decoy. And as you get into October, November, what I like to do as well is put some diver decoys in there because up north here, they really kind of congregate together. What's really nice about those diver decoys is they have a lot of white on them on the side. And so what you want to do is put those divers kind of on the outside of your spread where birds are going to be crossing or trafficking over. And so that gets them to look at your decoys a little bit quicker. That's a trick that I picked up from my dad way back in the day. But usually set up a diver line or just a clump of them so you have a bunch of white in that area. So the decoys that have a lot of white are golden eyes, bluebills, canvasbacks, and obviously the drakes have more color than the hens. And then when we're setting a water spread, depending on the wind, that's another huge factor is the wind, is we are essentially doing it either extremely loose so that they have multiple areas to land, or if we're shooting a crosswind, I will always have a big mess of decoys right in front of where I want them to stop. And the reason for that is that stopper line for birds, they're either going to land right in there where they're super congregated or they're going to stop just short of it. And so if you put that stopper to the right of you, if you have a left to right wind, you're going to have a great shot of them coming into the decoys like this instead of putting it all the way down here and only half the blind gets a shot. And so, and pretty much the same thing with a wind right behind my back as well. I'll essentially create a line with a bunch of fingers off of it, and if we have a jerk rig, I'll put the jerk rig right where I want the birds to land. And so I'm always kind of creating a stopper, and there's really no like letter pattern that I'm doing. It's not a W, it's not a double, it's not a U. I'm just making a nice line and clumping up a bunch of decoys in one area without them touching each other, just to give that mass from the sky. And so that's essentially water, other than most people don't go water hunting with more than 4 to 6 goose decoys. No one uses enough goose decoys, especially if you're trying to kill geese. So if you can afford it, find some old ones online. I would say run anywhere from 8 to 2 dozen and just watch the difference on ducks and geese when they're coming to water. And me personally, I'd never put them super close together. So like I said, if I'm doing a stopper line, I will put that on the right side of me because I want the birds to be landing right in front of me. And I will probably tuck that in closer now and put the geese outside of those. And generally my kill shot on water is about 15 to 20 yards. So your hide has to be really good. But for whatever reason, when you put the ducks here on your right, like in a crosswind, and you put geese just downwind of them, sometimes ducks get weird about flying over geese to get to ducks, and they will just shortstop you and hit the geese, or they'll even shortstop the geese. So that might be something you have to play around on depending on where you're at. But generally, I keep them pretty separate. So now it comes to field decoys, and I know Cal talked about it, but I'm going to reiterate it. Silhouettes do kill birds, and they have a lot of pluses. However, a lot of silhouettes are not fully flocked. So if it's a super sunny day, you will have it essentially glaring off of your decoys sometimes, depending on what brands you have. And so what's really cool is Dive Bomb made a fully flocked silhouette, and whenever I've used it on a sunny day, it works incredibly well. So the general gist of how you want to do it is you put the mass of decoys behind you or to the side, depending on what the wind is, to show that you have numbers and all that. And then you have your best looking decoys right in front of you in the kill hole. Pretty simple. Joe Heinz has talked about it on our podcast as well, where he will set a spread essentially of like a line going across and wide, depending if it's loose or tight, depends on the wind and the weather that day. And he will just have little fingers going out, so it gives them a nice little entry and a shooting lane. One of the questions I asked him is, why, like, how far are you putting out these fingers and what does it do for you? And he said that when birds are flying over decoys to get to where they want to land, it gives them more confidence because they are, you know, essentially safe. It's a nice little comfort deal. And so I'll stand by that any day of the week. Of the mass of your decoys, like the more economy decoys, go behind you to show numbers. And then you are also going to put your best decoys, your full bodies, right out in front of you where you want the birds to die. Another big question that we've been asked a lot is, where do you situate your decoys? Are you okay putting them behind you? And it totally depends on your hide, of course. So if I'm running an A-frame in the middle of the field and trying to look like a bush with a bunch of tree branches going around it, probably not going to want to put decoys behind me too much unless you're in Canada and you can just load up this ginormous field. Half the time, or I'd say 90% of the time, most people are running their A-frames on the edge of the field. And so obviously if you're on the edge of the field, don't put decoys behind you. But if you're in a layout blind in the middle of the field, I think it's totally okay. But I would put them a little ways back behind you. I've done it where you have all the decoys surrounding your blinds, and it works great some hunts. And then there's a lot of hunts where it doesn't work, and you're all kind of trying to figure out what's going on. So I'd say most times it's totally okay to put decoys behind you. I think it's when you're sitting in the decoys, you can get a little bit of trouble. But if you're sitting out in the middle of the field with your layouts, it is totally okay to put all of your decoys in front of you or to the side of you. That's my thing. I don't really like hiding amongst the decoys unless you're laying under backboards or something. But every time we hunt with people, they just put decoys all over the place and stuff just ends up going everywhere. So, but if I had it my way every single time, I'd have almost all the decoys in front of me or to the sides of me. That's just my personal preference. The day that we killed all the birds on the water tower with Heinz, we had a bunch of decoys behind us, and I mean a bunch of silhouettes, so it was fine. And then I think we had 72 Dave Smiths out in front right in the kill hole. So naturally, better looking decoys, they go in the kill hole. Another cool fun fact about how to set your spread is a lot of people will set their sleepers and their feeders not going into the wind. And if you go and watch birds on a loaf, on a roost, they always have their head. So this is their body, and this is their head on the back side of them. You point this way, so the front of their chest into the wind, so that their head is out of the wind. That's what's realistic. Same thing with feeding. If you watch birds feed, especially in a heavy wind, almost every single bird is pointing into the wind. I don't know why. Obviously, you can do some sideways, but I always found it hilarious that birds were walking with the wind at their back. That would push up their feathers. That would be uncomfortable for them. I think it looks unrealistic. Does it really matter? I don't know. Probably not. But it's just something that I've always realized. Obviously, if you're going to hunt a layout out in the middle of the field or even on a field edge, there's two totally different ways of doing it. I always thought, because they are in nature, everything with eyes on the side of its head is prey, and everything with eyes in front of it is a predator. And so I always figured when birds are flying perpendicular to you, you're facing this way, and birds are coming in like this, that their eyes were just totally on you. But they are focusing more so on what's in front of them than what's to the side of them, whereas they are, when they're landing into you, like the wind's at your back and they're landing into you, they do spook a little easier. And so that was an interesting concept for me. I always figured, because I knew a little bit of science and biology, I could figure it out, and I do not. So, but probably my new favorite way to kill ducks and geese in the field is either a quartering wind over your shoulder. So I'm right-handed, so it's very natural for me to go like this from left to right. And the birds, again, aren't looking straight at you their entire way in. Or a crosswind. The only thing that I haven't really liked about a crosswind is people always tend to put their decoys so far out from like a field edge. So what's really nice about your layouts in the field, and you set up on a crosswind, you can put your decoys as close to you as you want, and they're not really going to notice you as much as if they're coming into you. So that was a cool little tip that I've been trial and erroring. A lot of failed attempts at field hunting, but I think those are my two favorite ways. Quartering wind and straight up cross shoot. It always seems to go a little bit better, and birds tend to finish a little bit better. But anyway, that's going to wrap it up for me here today. Thank you guys for your listener questions. If you have any more, let us know in the comments below, and we'll probably do a video on you. Be sure to subscribe, share it with a friend, check out the podcast on our channel.